For player profiles, in-depth features, and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world. Hello, welcome back to the Scouted Football Podcast. It is Handbook Release Week. We revealed our front cover to the world on Monday, Arsenal's very own Emile Smith-Rowe, adorning Volume 12. Thank you very much to each and every one of you who's purchased, subscribed, or even shared our work at Scouted so far. It's very, very much appreciated. This week on the Scouted Podcast, we thought it was quite fitting to sit down and chat to the author behind our showcase feature in the new volume, the topic of which is Arsenal's Hale End Academy, hence the Smith-Rowe cover. Lewis Ambrose penned that particular piece, or love letter, depending on which way you look at it. And I'm delighted to welcome him back to the Scouted Pod. How are things, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, Joe. Thanks for having me. I'm very honoured to be asked on and to do the piece as well. It's a good time to write about Arsenal, obviously, and a perfect time to write about Hale End.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic piece first and foremost, but also, you know, a fantastic time to be writing about Arsenal and Hale End, as you say. I mean, it's something like 9 games unbeaten now, isn't it? At the time of recording. So do feel free to blame me when you don't make it to 10 at the weekend. But yeah, last time out we discussed VfB Stuttgart on this podcast. That episode is available and still very relevant. It's number 54 if you would like to go back and listen to Lewis's words of wisdom on that particular club. But it's Arsenal this time around. I just want to get sort of a feel, you know, what was the thought process, the creative process, you know, what is the gist of the piece that you've penned in Volume 12?
So the idea broadly was, could you write a piece about Hale End? And yeah, so I actually really appreciate that it was sort of, no one said to me, and some of you guys, I obviously speak to some of you guys that Scouted quite often, and no one said to me, can you write a piece and this has to be what it is. It was just supposed to be, you know, Hale End. And I had to think, and for me, Arsenal are a club that, as a fan, all clubs have those things that you sort of cling to and your sort of identity, I guess, what makes you different to other clubs. And that's something that Arsenal over the past few years have been scrambling for a little bit and maybe lost. And now we're seeing the first generation of truly homegrown talents in a really, really long time come through into the first team. And it's a time when I think fans have been, if they aren't still, have been sort of disillusioned with the club a little bit. And that connection definitely gets brought back into focus by these players being there, and also a connection to the past. So I mean, you know, obviously historically, that is the connection with academy players who come through. And so I went back in the piece all the way to the late 80s when Arsenal hadn't won a title like we are now for 18 years, and talked about, you know, the fact that back then the famous Anfield 1989 last game of the season featured so many homegrown players and English homegrown players as well, which is something I'll come on to in a second. So Arsenal have this proud history. Even you can go back further than then into the 70s, and some of the icons of the club, you know, guys that had never played for anyone else, Liam Brady and Charlie George, before they broke into the Arsenal first team. Then the club didn't have any real success for a long period. The late 80s did have that success again, the early 90s as well, with, you know, Tony Adams and David Rocastle and Michael Thomas and Paul Merson all coming through, and this incredible generation. Ray Parlour was obviously there even longer, sort of the back end of that, and then into the Arsene Wenger era. And then you had this weird spell where Arsenal became known for giving chances to young players, but those young players were never really if you want to put it that way. So all of this time that we talked about Arsenal, you know, developing players and having some of the best young talents in the world. And obviously, you know, you talk about Thierry Henry or Patrick Vieira and Nicolas Anelka before them, and a little bit later Robin van Persie and Cesc Fabregas. But all of those players were signed as teenagers. The development had been done somewhere else. And a lot of them grew to understand Arsenal and what the club means to the fans and how the fans think, but they weren't born into that. And that's what's different now. The Invincibles, you talk about all those players that I just mentioned. Ashley Cole was the only player really that, and Parler was still there, but Ashley Cole was the only player that was really homegrown and young and had broken through into that team. And beyond then, you sort of have to skip forward a few years to Jack Wilshere. And now we have this generation, which is really incredible as a fan of Emile Smith Rowe and Bukayo Saka, especially those two, who have not just broken into the team, but this team's being moulded around them, and they play that sort of Arsenal football, if you can put it like that. This movement, pass and move, one touch, two touch. The football that Arsenal fans, I think, grew to love over the last 15 years and grew to miss over the last 3 or 4 years. So to have that being, the way that the team is managing to play again, and to have that being brought to the fore by 2 homegrown players is really, really special, and a massive, massive credit to all of the work being done in the academy.
Yeah, for those two to be sort of two of the key exponents of that style of play, that particular brand, is, to be an Arsenal fan, that must be, really gratifying and really, great to see, because, who doesn't love it when a homegrown player from that region comes through at their boyhood club or at your boyhood club. It's the stuff that, that makes, despite all the money and the contracts and the get out clauses, it's what kind of brings football back to its original purity. And I think that that's kind of what the piece touches on, that it's a great living history of Arsenal. And I think just that the brief sort of like little introduction there, that the history of Hale End, if you will, I think it's a lovely way of sort of putting it and capturing the essence of a club. I suppose it's probably best to begin with Emile Smith Rowe then. He's obviously the cover star, but also he's somebody who's coming into, having this key, in this integral first team role with Arsenal this season. And we touched on how the team have, they're currently on a lengthy unbeaten run. I just wanted to gauge, what are Emile Smith Rowe's key responsibilities in this Arsenal team in the season of 2021-22?
I think if you look back to last season and the season before, Arsenal really, when the team was really, really struggling, it was a lack of movement. Everything was static. The ball moved slowly. The players didn't move or moved slowly when they did. And it looked like a lot of different pieces that had been put together. Emile Smith Rowe is a player that sort of sews that all together and makes the game flow. It's really, really lovely to watch. He's rough around the edges at the same time a little bit, and doesn't always quite look in complete control. He's really robust. This lovely mixture, and it reminds me a little bit of how people talked about Jack Wilshere when he broke into the Arsenal team, of this mixture of playing football sort of, the so-called Spanish way, but with that kind of typical English grit. I think Emile Smith Rowe has those both sides to him. So you've got the pass and move football, and you've got that grittiness, that get stuck in sort of thing that people just love. And especially when it's a homegrown player, people just absolutely go mad for that. So right now in the Arsenal team, he's playing fantastically from the left-hand side. We've seen for a few years now, there's been such a focus on the left wing back, Kieran Tierney before, and now Nuno Tavares at the moment, bombing on and providing that width on the left. And the player on the left before has been maybe Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang quite often, who has drifted in. He's more of a goal scorer, and then the play becomes quite... Try and put it into words is quite difficult. It becomes sort of chunky. The game doesn't flow. Smith Rowe's a completely different player, and he gets the ball and he does just knit things together. He drifts inside. He can run outside. And what I love about watching him so much is that I feel like he always does what the players around him need from him. Never what he wants to do, never the thing to get him on the ball or get himself into the best possible position. But if the player closest to him is moving towards the ball, he'll move away from it to open up space. And if the player is outside him or inside him is making a run forward, then he'll make a run toward or move towards the ball and the guy on the ball, just to drag defenders away and create spaces and create openings, even when he's not getting on the ball himself. When he does get on the ball, I think Arsenal have played the last couple of years quite slowly, too slowly most of the time. And for me, he's a player that always thinks forward with his first touch and accelerates the game instantly with as few touches as possible. He'll get the ball and he'll turn instantly. He'll know that there's space behind him or space outside him, and he'll turn into the space. And one or two touches later, the ball's gone. It's moved on to somebody else. I think it's really, really special. And this season as well, to be already now adding goals to his game is sort of the last thing, the last piece, if you like, that you could have asked from him from the way he was playing at the back end of last season. Goals and assists, and he's started the season in really good form in front of goal as well. So yeah, he's become absolutely crucial in a really, really short amount of time.
I think the point that you're making there about sort of how he takes the right number of touches. Often the optimal number of touches is the fewest it takes to complete the action, which is a very scientific way of putting it. But the fewer touches you take to be able to beat a man or to pick your pass or to score a goal, it's often the fewer touches you take, the quicker you're able to execute that. And I think that's always a sign of top players. It's probably quite topical, but based on his last 5 league games for Arsenal, you've got two assists and 3 goals in his last 5 league games for Arsenal. All of those coming in games where he's played on that left hand side. I mean, there's with the England squad quite literally being announced today on the day that we're recording. I've seen a few sort of reactionary takes, which have been sort of Emile Smith Rowe's done this, he's done that, he's compared to other people in that sort of position. I'm not fully in agreement about that. I think he's sort of in the conversation, or he's gradually starting to put himself in the conversation for England alongside Bukayo Saka. But I'm not fully on board with just because he's had a good run of form, should he necessarily be in the squad? You have to look at the wider context, which is 2 World Cup qualifiers which England need to win. I think it was Grace Robertson, Grace on Football, who said that it's probably bringing Smith Rowe into the setup now is, right at the end of a cycle, which is quite important. Then it's perhaps not the best time to be doing it. But I do think that he's beginning to sort of knock on that door. There was he came on, I think it was in the he didn't come on. It was Curtis Jones who came on in England's under-21 game against Andorra last international break. And it was Smith Rowe who ultimately scored the goal in that 1-0 win, which was looking like it was going to be a bit of an upset. I mean, a 0-0 draw would have been an upset against Andorra's 21s, but Smith Rowe just has that knack of being able to change a game with just one simple action. And I think we've seen that in the Premier League now as well, which is obviously the biggest test for young players. Is you can do it at youth level, you can do it as a youth international, but can you do it when it matters for the first team? And I think we're beginning to see that. What's your stance on sort of the Smith Rowe, England, Saka sort of the whole dichotomy?
I think Smith Rowe may be really unfortunate, maybe fortunate that he gets to stay out of the limelight a little bit at the moment. Well, there's obviously so much hype around what he's doing for Arsenal. Is it the best thing to be thrown into the England squad and hope to maybe spark some life into the attack there? Probably not. Unfortunate in terms of any previous England generation. I think he'd definitely be in the squad right now. This team is so stacked at the moment, and you just look at his position and you've got Mason Mount, Phil Foden and Jack Grealish and Saka, obviously Raheem Sterling playing out wide for England. There are players, Jadon Sancho has been dropped from the squad and not made this squad, so I don't think there can be complaints. I think it's just the size of the squad and the amount of depth that Gareth Southgate has. It's going to be hard for anyone to break in. As you say, these 2 games are actually important for England, last 2 qualifiers that they do need results from. And then there's a whole year, so until the World Cup. If Smith Rowe keeps playing like this, then he's going to be banging, not knocking on the door to go to Qatar. But as things stand, obviously that enormous list of players that's ahead of him, that's some ask. I don't think it's a massive issue, and while he maybe would have deserved an England call up, would one of those other players deserve to have been dropped from the squad? Probably not. So yeah, I don't think anyone can really have any complaints. I don't think it's a terrible thing for him to miss out. I don't think it's terrible news for Arsenal, and I always think now. I always think that the case of Phil Foden should be so instructive to all of us when we're talking and thinking about young players. And you look at Foden and Sancho, who came through at City at the same age and went on. They couldn't have gone on more opposite paths. And obviously, there are other players who maybe take a step down and go on loan to the Football League or abroad. But Sancho, to go straight into the first team at a Champions League club, while Foden was biding his time, and Pep Guardiola was talking about, this is the right thing for his development, and he'll get there in the end, and he's brilliant. Now, a few years down the line, and I don't think anyone can say that either Sancho or Foden made the wrong choice, nor did Mason Mount going and playing in abroad and then in the Championship for a year. There are very different ways for players to develop and different times that players progress as well at different ages. So I think we always need to keep that in mind a little bit more when we're talking about young players and the next steps and if they should be playing more or not. So Smith Rowe's playing a lot of football at the moment for his age. He's had injury troubles over the past few years as well, which is why he probably didn't break into the Arsenal side a bit sooner. I don't think it's any bad thing at all for him to keep focusing on becoming a key player for Arsenal and not have the burden of performing for his country on top of it.
You're mentioning about Qatar as well. I think if I was an Arsenal fan, I'd be thinking, okay, he's not in the squad for these qualifiers, but he's playing himself into form in what will be a very pivotal 12 months in Gareth Southgate's thinking for the squad for Qatar next summer. Obviously, if this was any other generation, as you said, then he'd be a shoo-in based on current form. But when the likes of Jadon Sancho aren't getting in, it does kind of shine a light on how diverse the option pool is, for Southgate to pick from. So I've not got too many qualms with it. I think it's, we've seen the discussions about how many right backs, Gareth, and which centre halves should be in the squad. You're never going to, when this is the other side of the coin with England. It's, when there is a pool of players who are immensely talented, you're never ever going to be able to appease everybody or appease every fan base or satisfy the individual opinion of somebody who proclaims to think that they know better. But I think that's just the world of football, really, isn't it?
It always used to be with England. You sort of saw the squad and somebody would be saying, how the hell's he in the squad? Or how's he got an England cap? And now it's just the complete opposite.
Yeah, and exactly. It's, people will argue about whatever you give them, whatever you present them with to argue about. But moving on, and it's probably quite topical that we're talking about England and the squad, because Aaron Ramsdale has been named in the latest squad for those final two qualifiers. And he's someone who's probably had to, not from Arsenal fans at all, he's probably taken a fair bit of flack from, newspaper columnists and people who looked at his summer transfer to the Emirates and said, how much? And now you've got a goalkeeper who is, playing really confidently, somebody who really earned that clean sheet against Leicester at the weekend. He's just full of zip, full of confidence. You're already seeing the reason that he's been purchased. The passing, the comfortable, how comfortable he is in possession, how good he is with the ball at his feet. How polarizing that is from Bernd Leno. It feels now down the line, it feels like a very much a feel-good transfer. And, I'll hold my hands up and say, at the time, I did sort of question maybe the fee, but then you've got to take into consideration Leno's contract length. You've got to bite the bullet now. And ultimately, it was a seller's market in the summer. So, yeah, I was wrong on Ramsdale, but I'm pleased to see how well he's adapting. I mean, from an Arsenal perspective, how do you feel that he's fitting into the squad?
No, firstly, I'd say don't excuse Arsenal fans from that.
I was trying to win back Curry favour again after the Smith Rowe bit.
From what should definitely be a group apology, and myself included as well. I think there are very few people looked at that fee and thought, oh yeah, they've got a really good deal there. Even if he is a young goalkeeper, I think there are a lot of question marks around his performances at Bournemouth and at Sheffield United, getting relegated twice in a row, and I think that's understandable. And I also think that he's doing a fantastic job of shutting everybody up, and as I say, myself included. So not just you and not just non-Arsenal fans, but definitely Arsenal fans for the most part as well. Yeah, I mean, on the ball, firstly, as you said, that is just fantastic. And I think it's probably something we didn't see that much of at Sheffield United, just because of the way that they played, a little bit more direct. Obviously, his long kicking is excellent as well, but it's those passes into midfield and that have really caught the eye. There were a couple of against. There are some in every game, and it's the sort of thing maybe you might see a clip now and then, and you think, oh, that's a really good pass, but it's only really valuable if somebody can do it consistently. Ramsdale's always looking for the opportunity to break lines, like you'd expect from your best ball playing centre backs, and pinging the ball into the feet of a midfielder or even a striker. It's really, really impressive, those sort of daisy cutters that seem to skim across the ground and land right into the feet of whoever he's aiming for. It's a massive weapon as well, obviously. You take 3 or 4 or 5 opposition players out of the game all at once. Talk about a way to break down pressing and launch an attack. It's not a long, hopeful ball, but he plays passes as good as any goalkeeper around at the moment, pretty much, save maybe the likes of Manuel Neuer and Marc-Andre ter Stegen. So that's been really, really important and really impressive for Arsenal. You can tell how much he thinks about what he's going to do with the ball. I really I noticed it first in the game against Burnley, and he's done it recently as well against Leicester and Aston Villa. Quite often he'll have the ball in his hands, and you picture a typical scene. The goalkeeper's got the ball on his hands, he's on the edge of the box, and the 2 centre-backs are sort of to his left and to his right, not that far away. And he didn't give the ball out because everyone was being marked, but he didn't put it on the ground either. He actually took 5 or 6 steps back before he put it on the ground and played out. And I think just that little bit of, both centre-backs are marked. They're both covered from where you're standing. So what would you do if you were a midfielder? You'd change the angle. You'd change the space. You'd use, you'd make the pitch as big as possible. Use all the width, or as a striker or a winger, use as much of the pitch in terms of depth as you can. To see a goalkeeper thinking, I'm going to move further back into my box, closer to my goal before I put the ball on the ground, because it forces the strikers to react in how they're pressing or how they're marking, just tells you how much he thinks about how he's going to play out from the back before he does it. So that's been a massive, massive thing for Arsenal. And Bernd Leno isn't bad with the ball at his feet, but has looked shaky at times the last couple of seasons, and definitely doesn't have the technique of Ramsdale when it comes to picking a man out. And then on top of that, he's been excellent in the box and the classic goalkeeper stuff, and on his line and in his 6-yard box, claiming crosses away at Burnley to take pressure off the defence, where we know they've got 3 or 4 or 5 big players in the box all getting around the goalkeeper. And then obviously last weekend, the shot stopping against Leicester was just absolutely brilliant. So for now, it's just everything that you could ask for from a goalkeeper, and making a lot of people look very silly for their predictions when he was signed.
Yeah, that Leicester performance was definitely one which it was you're not going to beat me. You can try, you can keep coming back at me, but you're not going to beat me. And yeah, when you see a goalkeeper playing with that confidence, when you can sort of see the tide turning of popular opinion, I think that's it's only something which is gonna boost your own confidence or your own self-esteem. But talking about England with Emile Smith Rowe, Ramsdale is in the England squad. And there was a very good tweet last weekend, which from an Arsenal perspective might not have been received as well as it was received by others, but it was by Jonathan Liew at The Guardian, who was saying that Ramsdale's performance is sort of a precursor to him dropping a clanger against Brazil in the World Cup semi-final in 2022, and it's playing up to the stereotype of England goalkeepers at major tournaments. Your Rob Greens, your Paul Robinsons, who've previously made errors. David James, I'm sure, has made 1 or 2. Aside from that, the debate around England goalkeepers is one which has always been, it's the position which has never really been overly secure. And at the moment, the current number 1 is Jordan Pickford. I think he plays markedly better for England than he does for Everton. But if you're Pickford, are you thinking, maybe there's a young pretender here in Ramsdale who actually, if he becomes Arsenal's undisputed number one over the next few seasons, there's reason to sort of suggest I might have to start worrying about my place here.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think, obviously, not that long ago, we were talking about Dean Henderson probably as looking like he was going to become first choice goalkeeper at Man United. And it generally does work like that, doesn't it? No matter which country or the leading nations, if you play for one of the big clubs in goal, then you're pretty much going to be the first choice goalkeeper for the national team as well. I think Jordan Pickford will definitely be a bit concerned. It would be interesting to see what Gareth Southgate does, because I think on current form, I would probably say that Ramsdale should get the shirt on current form. The question is, it's always a bit more difficult to drop a goalkeeper than a player in any other position, or for a goalkeeper to earn the opportunity to win the place, if you like. So what does Southgate do? He's got a clear number one, and he's had a clear number one for a while now, going back to before the 2018 World Cup. And now he's got a situation where for the first time that guy has really genuine competition sort of on an eye-to-eye level. It's a really difficult thing. How do you drop Pickford, and then what happens if Ramsdale gets injured, and then you're putting a goalkeeper in for the World Cup that knows that he wasn't your first choice goalkeeper anymore, and that you maybe had those doubts about him. So it's a really tricky situation. I expect Pickford to probably play these last couple of qualifiers. As we said, they matter. But then going into 2022, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Southgate sort of split the games between the two of them leading up to the tournament and say, well, win the shirt then. And I think that's probably the best way that he can deal with it. But I'm not completely convinced, because I do think it's always tricky with the goalkeepers to give that one, maybe the one that you drop, that little bit of a knock in confidence. The worst thing is that could come back and bite you later when it matters most.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think when you mentioned Dean Henderson's name, I was thinking, well, yeah, that's true. That speaks to my previous point, which was it's never really been a secure position. And whenever a young English goalkeeper comes through, I mean, there's been discussions around Nick Pope. I mean, he's not in the squad this time, I don't think. But if there's always discussion around who will be the contender with Pickford, then it's never, well, this is absolutely Pickford's number one position, and there's nobody else who's going to threaten him for that. So Ramsdale is the latest in a long line of those. He's been doing well for the 21s, obviously now starting for Arsenal. So yeah, it'll be a curious one to keep an eye on over the next 12 months or so, up until Qatar in 2022. And we've kind of diverted away from Hale End a little bit there, just to talk about Ramsdale. I think it was a worthwhile endeavour, but let's get back to the actual academy. And Arsenal's under 23s obviously doing very well this season. I think on a previous podcast, I wouldn't quite say tipped, but I kind of backed them to be competing for the PL2 Division 1 title this season. And to be fair, they're not doing too badly, because at the time of recording, they are top with 22 points from 10 games, 29 goals scored, 18 conceded, 1 point above Manchester City's 23s, who you would assume are the real contenders to Arsenal there, having won it last season, Manchester City. But their last game, as a quirk of fate as it would be, their last under 23 match, aside from the EFL Trophy game, their last PL2 game, I was fortunate enough to be at. That was at Ellen Road, where they beat Leeds 4-2. And it was great to see in the flesh Flo Balogun and Salah-Eddin Oulad Mohand, who were the two of 3 or 4 standouts in that Arsenal team. I suppose it's probably best to start with Balogun, because he's been prolific in PL2 this season. But the opportunities in the first team have been harder to come by. He's been getting the odd few minutes off the bench. It was about 8 or 9 minutes, 10 minutes off the bench against AFC Wimbledon in the EFL Cup. 10 minutes against Chelsea in the league back in August. But aside from that, it's not been. The minutes haven't really been forthcoming for the 20-year-old. Contrast that with his under 23 form, which has been 9 goals, 2 assists in probably around 7 or 8 games. Where do we go from here with Balogun? Because you look at I mean, especially at the beginning of the season, you looked at the troubles Arsenal were having in front of goal, and you were thinking maybe, if Balogun kind of puts together a run of form, then is there an argument for him?
Yeah, it's a really really tricky situation for him. Obviously, he's signed that new contract and stayed at the club last summer when there were questions about whether or not he would or if he'd move on. He looks every bit the player that is ready for first team football at some level, and that is needed for him to keep progressing. As you said, the Premier League 2 looks like a bit of a cakewalk to him at the moment, and he needs to be pushed. I think Arsenal, yeah, he started the first day of the season, the loss to Brentford, and it was a bit rushed through because of a couple of coronavirus cases, and Eddie Nketiah got injured last minute as well, so they didn't really have much choice but to use him. And he did look, I mean, it was his Premier League debut. He did look a little bit out of his depth, away from home against Brentford. Three big physical centre halves. It was a bit of a baptism of fire, and I don't think it was a surprise that he struggled that day. The whole team struggled that day. So a kid making his Premier League debut was always going to struggle playing up front, especially where the service just wasn't there. It's tough. Then, as you say as well, a few minutes in the EFL Cup against Wimbledon, not even really getting on the pitch there because Eddie Nketiah's still at the club, and Eddie Nketiah's minutes at the moment, with Arsenal not playing in Europe this season, are limited to cup games because he's got Aubameyang and Alex Lacazette ahead of him when it comes to the Premier League. So I think in an ideal world, Arsenal would have found solutions for the futures of Lacazette and Nketiah, both out of contract at the end of the season in the summer, and I think they would have also found a solution, having known that both of those players were going to end up staying at the club for this season, would have found a solution to get Balogun some first team football out on loan. And then that's probably what I'm hoping happens in January, because whether it's in the Championship or the further down in the Premier League, or one of those leagues that seems to be fantastic at developing players like Eredivisie or the Bundesliga even, Balogun needs to be playing at a higher level now to really push himself. And we talked obviously about, I mentioned, different players have different development paths and they develop at different times. And Phil Foden was getting those minutes. It was only bits here and there, but he was getting those minutes at Manchester City. If it was 10 or 5 or 15 off the bench in the Premier League for a couple of seasons, Balogun's not even getting on the bench at the moment for Arsenal. So he needs to be around a first team squad, which he is in training every day, but he needs to be there at the weekend somewhere. And we've seen what those loans have done for players in the past. I mean, I don't think Tammy Abraham is a dissimilar player, and had a couple of fantastic years in the Championship, massively helped him push on to that sort of first team level at Chelsea. I would see, that as the next step for Balogun, whether it's the Championship or not, who knows, but first team football is an absolute must.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the game which I watched of him, sort of in the flesh, the first half he was matched by Charlie Cresswell, one of the Leeds central defenders, but at the same time you could still see there was a real threat there, and there was one occasion where he did spin him, and I think he had one shot which hit the post in the first half, and then one which crept just wide. And you did think, I mean, he's far too good for this level. And the defenses which he's coming up against, I mean, they are probably 1, 2, and 3 years, younger than him, but they are, they're very adept players. So first team football, I agree, is a must for him. The question is, with Eddie Nketiah as an example, does a loan benefit him? Does he need to bide his time that tiny bit longer with the contract situation, as you said? Can a club of Arsenal's stature, with the transition period that the club is going through under Arteta, can they justify going from sort of Lacazette and Aubameyang to somebody like Balogun and giving those minutes over when he, as you say, with the Brentford game, hasn't really done it yet. He's maybe done it in fits and starts in the Europa League in the past few seasons, but hasn't really done it yet. I mean, I feel like if it was a smaller club, you'd maybe be able to justify it a bit better. Whereas with Arsenal, the expectation's just that little bit higher.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's why a loan is the ideal solution. At the moment, you're looking at, and that probably extends to next season as well, because you're looking at Arsenal at the moment. Lacazette and Nketiah are both out of contract at the end of the season. So next year, you'll have Aubameyang, maybe Gabriel Martinelli, and Balogun as the three strikers in the squad. If and he's getting on, and he's well into his 30s now. If Aubameyang picked up an injury and was out for any extended period of time, can Arsenal, chasing to get back into Europe, back into the Champions League, afford to rely on Balogun to fire them there? Probably not, or it's probably too much of a roll of the dice to go with it. So, yeah, a loan this season would have been great for him to have that chance to showcase that he could be the second choice striker next season. It might be a bit late for that now. We'd see if he goes out in January and how he does, if he does go out and where he goes out. But a loan next season now probably seems more likely. The club have at least got him tied down, which they didn't have this time last year, and were seriously concerned about losing him. He's now under contract. His future's sort of in his own, but also in Arsenal's hands. And a loan next season, as well as the back end of this season, I think makes the most sense. While Arsenal, as you say, transition into that next phase, that next sort of era of strikers, because Lacazette and Aubameyang 2 or 3 years from now both won't be at the club, and certainly Aubameyang, if he is still at the club in 2 years, won't be playing regularly or be able to play regularly. Certainly not twice a week anymore. So that's where that window of opportunity will arrive for Balogun. Now, that period between now and then is figuring out how to make sure Arsenal know how ready he is and get him as ready as possible to compete, to be in the squad, in the starting lineup, 18 months down the line.
Yeah, essentially to make sure that in the interim period, it's not essentially wasted time, where he's not competing against the level of defender that he should be. Moving on to the next player in Arsenal's under-23s, which has sort of made a few headlines recently, and that's Salah-Eddine Oulad Mahand. He made the bench in the last round of the Carabao Cup, based on the fact that he'd been doing very well with the under-23s, doing very well since he's kind of treated Hale End as sort of a finishing school, given the fact that he's come over from the Netherlands. He was schooled at I believe Feyenoord for a time, and he's now got 4 goals in 8 games at PL2 level this season. Very silky, very good on the ball, but off it I was quite impressed with him as well, because when you're not watching Arsenal under 23 every week, but you're hearing about this player called Salah, you immediately think, oh, but he's very good technically. You see clips of him on the Arsenal Academy account and stuff like that, and you think, well, yeah, you know what, there's reason to be excited about him. But then you actually watch him in person and you think, actually, he's quite robust as well. He can stand up to challenges, he can stand up for himself. And that was also something I was quite encouraged by. He scored quite in that last PL2 game. Arsenal played that 4-2 win, scored a wonderful curling effort from outside the area right into the top corner. Was aided by the fact that the goalkeeper was pressured by Balogun actually, and then sort of gave the ball away. It fell to Oulad Mahand on the edge of the box, and he showcased that technique to bend it into the far corner. But apart from Salah-Eddine Oulad Mahand, there are other players in the 23s which I'm sure you'll have heard of, Lewis. The likes of Kido Taylor-Hart, Mika Beereth, and co. Because when I saw them, I thought, actually, you know what, this. Hale End. This is Hale End. This is what we're seeing. This is the reputation, the pedigree.
Yeah, and obviously it's always exciting, and you're always wondering as a fan when the youth team, when the under-23s, the under-18s are doing well, you're always looking for that next Saka, Smith Rowe, who has the ability, the potential, and who will get the opportunity to break into the first team. And Salah, obviously, you said, was on the bench recently, and is surprisingly two-way as a midfielder, as a sort of creative midfielder, and his brother joined Arsenal from Feyenoord at the same time as well. Is a couple of years younger, I think, so maybe that's the same name to look out for a year or two from now. You just mentioned Beereth, who joined from Fulham in the summer and looks like a real prospect up front. He's stocky and quite powerful, but quite quick as well. And averaged, I think, a goal a game for Fulham last season for the under-18s, and is playing 18 now, his first season of under-23 football for Arsenal. I think he made a couple of appearances for Fulham last year, and doesn't look like it's his first season of under-23 football, and doesn't look out of place at all. And then the sort of more homegrown guys like, Kiddo Taylor-Hart, who looks really exciting. Maybe the development has been a little bit slower or taken a little bit longer than other players at that level. So he's 19 already, I think. So sort of that age where Saka was already playing for the first team and a bit older than the other guys that we've talked about. But now looks to, in the last year, have sort of made that leap. Really quick feet, but a really tall, rangy sort of winger who adds a real directness to the team. Amari Hutchinson is another one that I would mention, who looks like a Bukayo Saka regen, basically. Intelligent, considered, left-footed, wide midfielder who has filled in at left-back as well. Very, very similar to Saka, and unbelievably skillful. And then I think another one that people have been talking about is Charlie Patino, obviously, who has also been sort of mooted for a first team breakthrough this season. This season probably looks like it's a step too early. And very interesting, Mikel Arteta's words on him have very much echoed the words of Pep Guardiola on Phil Foden. We're looking after it, even though fans are maybe clamouring to see him now in the first team, get a few minutes, get on the bench, get an opportunity to break in. We're going to be patient as a club. We're going to look after him. He'll take those necessary steps when we think he's ready, and protect him from that limelight a little bit. I think Patino is maybe the one that people are most excited about, and sort of invokes memories of Jack Wilshere as a technical central midfielder. But I don't think there's any rush really to move any of these guys into the first team, and they'll all get their chances as and when, probably, pre-season next year. When we go into next season, there's going to be a lot of players going to the World Cup. Maybe Arsenal, hopefully Arsenal, as far as I'm concerned, will be back in Europe next season. And then there will be more minutes to go around, more opportunities. A lot of the first team players will probably, or a fair few, will be off to the World Cup, and then there will be minutes there as well. So there's no rush for any of these guys, but it's really exciting to know that just on the cusp, there are 3 or 4 or 5 players who, if that opportunity comes up for them, look like they could step up and sort of be the next guy to take that leap into the first team.
I suppose it's a very enticing prospect if you're one of those young players, to think that, with the contract situations of a few of the first team players, and also the potential minutes that are going to come in various competitions over the next 12 to sort of 18 months, a lot of these kids are still going to be teenagers or just in their early 20s that we've discussed there. So there is going to be opportunity. And I mean, still in 18 months' time, Charlie Patino, for example, is still going to be 19 or something. So there's a long, long way to go. So that's something I always try to preach is, it's right that we shine a light on the fact that they're developing well and performing well, but let them develop and let's not rush them through unless they are sort of, generational Bukayo Saka type talents, and they actually are needed in the first team to help win games. But no, thank you very much, Lewis, for joining me on this one. A bit of a Hale End special with some Aaron Ramsdale mixed in there just for good measure. It's, of course, alongside the Scouted Football Handbook release, Volume 12. Thank you again to anyone who's bought that already. If you haven't and you'd like to find out what's in there, alongside the 25 profiles, the 4 features, we have, of course, Lewis's piece on Hale End, which is fantastic. We have Chelsea and the situation about departing young players. We also have an exclusive interview with Leeds United's Victor Orta, the director of football there. So if you'd like to check that out, do head on over to sfhandbook.com. Yeah, this has been the Scouted Football Podcast with myself, Joe Donoghue, and Lewis Ambrose on Hale End, the Arsenal Academy setup. Stay safe, take care, bye for now. For player profiles, in-depth features and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world.